What do you think of when you hear Roman soldier? A majestic legionnaire in shining armor, marching in orderly rows along the Arc de Triomphe. An invincible warrior, skilled with gladius and scutum, whose bravery and discipline conquered the nations? Perhaps this was the case in the ceremonial chronicles and in the bas-reliefs. But the true life of a Roman soldier, far from heroic tales, was much more severe, ordinary, and most importantly, unpredictable. This is not a story of grandiose battles where the legion's name was written into eternity. This is the story of countless invisible battles fought by every soldier on a daily basis, with fatigue, hunger, cold, heat, disease, and monotony. This is the story of a man who woke up every morning not to the sound of a fanfare, but to the sharp cry of a centurion, going on another round of routine duties where every little thing could cost his life. Imagine a world where your life is a constant readiness for battle, even if the enemy is not visible, where hygiene is not a luxury, but a matter of survival, where every step outside the camp walls, and sometimes even inside them, can lead to illness, injury, or death. The Roman soldier was not just a killing machine. He was a master of survival in conditions that would seem unbearable to us today. His strength lay not only in his physical prowess, but also in his incredible stamina, adaptability, and often the unspoken support he found among his fellow soldiers. By the way, in these cramped barracks and on long campaigns, where men were torn from the usual family way, special ties were often tied. Friendship that grew into something more, emotional attachment, and sometimes even physical intimacy between fellow soldiers. All this was part of army life, not always officially approved, but sometimes the only source of warmth and support in this harsh male world. So are you ready to dive into Roman Legionnaire's day? Find out what was hidden behind the glint of his helmet. How did he eat, train, build, fight invisible enemies, and find solace in the most unexpected places? Stay tuned and we will reveal every hour of its existence from dawn to dawn. This is not just a story about military life. It is a journey into the very heart of his soul and body, where survival was not just an instinct, but an art. The Roman soldier didn't wake up, he jumped up. No alarm clocks or morning coffee. Dawn was just breaking through the cracks in the wooden walls or canvas of the tent when the shrill sound of a buckskin trumpet broke the pre-dawn stillness. The sound meant one thing: vigilate, wake up, and God forbid they should hesitate. Discipline in the Roman army was not just a word, but a vital necessity, and the slightest delay was severely punished. The first trumpet was immediately followed by a second, announcing the beginning of the working day. Legionnaires jumped up from their sleeping places, often simple straw mattresses or skins on the dirt floor. Get dressed first: tunic, belt, sandals, and in the cold season, an additional cloak. Each soldier had to be able to dress in complete darkness or in the dim light of oil lamps, which hardly dispelled the gloom of the barracks. Then as soon as possible to put yourself in order. Water was scarce, and it was valuable. Wash your face if you are lucky from the common cauldron or from the bucket where water was brought from the nearest spring. Shaving was rare, and haircuts were strictly prescribed. The main thing is the cleanliness of weapons and equipment. The metal should have glistened, the leather should have been chafed, and the straps should have been tightened. Not only the centurions, but also their comrades watched over this. After all, the general safety depended on the state of each person's equipment. But what was happening in the crowded barracks in the early hours of the morning? The smell of sweat, stale hay, metal, and anxiety. Boots clattering, weapons clanking, muffled commands. In such conditions, when there was no personal space at all, and everyone shared a home and life with dozens of other men, special connections were established. Morning rituals, helping her fasten her armor, or just a silent exchange of glances might be more important than words. Sometimes under the cover of this routine, when one helped the other pull on a boot or adjusted a cloak, there was a special intimacy and understanding without words that bound some soldiers together more than a simple statutory relationship. After minimal hygiene procedures, collection, the entire cohort was forming up on the parade ground, awaiting inspection by the centurion or tribune. Everything was checked, from the cleanliness of the boots to the sharpening of the sword. Mistakes were not forgiven, and punishments could be public and humiliating. The mourning of a Roman soldier wasn't just the beginning of the day, it was the first act in a daily survival drama where every second mattered. Are you ready to move on to the next challenge? If you imagine soldiers sitting at a table and having a peaceful breakfast, then you are mistaken. Roman legionnaires did not have the luxury of leisurely meals. Breakfast was more like a quick snack, on thigo, designed to give energy for the upcoming loads. And it was as harsh as their entire lives. The basis of the diet was grain. Most often it was spelt, spelta, or barley, hordeum, which were issued to soldiers in the form of rations. A thick porridge pulse was made from the grain. It was not the same porridge that is served today with butter and sugar. The pulse was fresh, dense, cooked in water, sometimes with the addition of salt if it was available. It was a source of slow carbohydrates, which gave energy for a long time, but did not please with an exquisite taste. It was eaten quickly, often standing up, directly from an earthenware bowl or wooden plate. In addition to the pulse, the diet included bread. Dark, coarse, sometimes with an admixture of bran and even sand from poor grinding. This bread was hard and dense but well stored. It could be soaked in water or vinegar to make it easier to eat. Sometimes a little cheese was added to the bread, which was a cheap and affordable source of protein. Meat was rare. If it did appear, it was most often in the form of salted pork or dried fish products that could be stored for a long time in field conditions. Fresh meat was generally available only after a successful hunt or during long camps where cattle could be slaughtered. The drinks were also functional. Water taken from nearby springs was often of questionable quality. Therefore, they preferred posca, vinegar diluted with water, sometimes with the addition of herbs. Posa not only quenched thirst, but also had disinfectant properties helping to prevent intestinal infections. If there was wine, it was in a very diluted form, and more often it was reserved for special occasions or for officers. But what did this say about the relationship between soldiers? Breakfast, even if it was meager, was a moment to quickly exchange words, share leftovers, or just silently sympathize with each other. Sharing a meal, even if it was the same monotonous porridge, created a sense of community and mutual support. Sometimes when one warrior passed a piece of bread to another or shared a last helping of pasca, it was more than just an act of kindness. It was a tacit promise, an unspoken recognition of a bond that transcended camaraderie in arms. These small gestures of Zababoda, unnoticed by prying eyes, could have been the basis of a deep personal attachment in the harsh army routine. Breakfast ended as quickly as it had begun. Another trumpet, and the legionnaires are already ready for the next task. Their bodies were fed, but their spirits were constantly being tested for strength. Are they ready for the next challenge? After a quick breakfast, the most grueling part of the day began: morning workouts. The Roman army was known for its unprecedented discipline and physical fitness, and this was the result of daily, brutal exercises. For a soldier, training wasn't just about practicing skills. It was a continuous process of refining the body and spirit that separated the living from the dead on the battlefield. Training sessions began with marches. Legionnaires walked tens of kilometers daily with full equipment, the weight of which could reach 30-40 kilo. This included armor, larica segmentata or hamata, helmet, scutum, shield, gladius, short sword, pilum, javelin, as well as personal equipment, a bag of food, tools, spare sandals, tent pegs. They marched in all weathers over all terrain, over rough terrain, over rivers, over mountains. The goal was not only to develop endurance, but also to improve combat training. The Legion had to move as a single unit, maintaining its formation and speed. After the marches, combat exercises began. The soldiers practiced punches and defense with wooden swords against wooden pillars, as well as among themselves. Tactical formations were worked out: testudo, turtle, wedges, flanking detours. They trained to throw pilums for range and accuracy, practiced wrestling, jumping, and running. All this was done in full or partial equipment in order to bring the training conditions as close as possible to real combat. Special attention was paid to construction skills. Each legionnaire was not only a warrior, but also an engineer. Every day a fortified camp, castrum, was built and dismantled, with a moat, rampart, and palisade. This required a well-coordinated work, the ability to handle a shovel, pickaxe, and axe. Building a camp was part of the routine, no matter how tired the soldier was after marching or training. But what happened during these grueling workouts? Pain, sweat, fatigue. Soldiers fell, got bruises and abrasions. But no one dared complain. The centurions kept a close eye on everyone, and the slightest sign of weakness was punished. But it was in this harsh crucible that camaraderie was forged. When one person helped the other up after a fall, when they exchanged sympathetic glances after a particularly difficult exercise, these moments strengthened the bond between them. In these trials, when the body reached its limit and the spirit needed support, there was often a deep emotional connection. Silent help during a difficult exercise, hand support when the strength was no longer left, or just a look of understanding helped to cement a relationship that went beyond the simple army brotherhood. At these moments, physical fatigue gave way to an unexpected but much-needed tenderness. The training sessions lasted until noon, until the very heat of the day. By the end of them, the Legionnaire was exhausted but ready for new challenges. His body was forged, his spirit tempered. He was prepared to fight, even if it wasn't the enemy he was going to fight, but his own weaknesses. What was waiting for him next? The Roman Legionnaire's lunch was as functional and quick as breakfast, but perhaps a little more plentiful. It was a short break in a grueling schedule, designed to replenish energy before the afternoon. Festive feasts were out of the question. The meal was still based on pulse, a thick cereal porridge. Vegetables could be added to it auberge, if they were available. Cabbage, turnips, onions, garlic. These vegetables were not only a source of vitamins, but also gave at least some taste to the monotonous food. Sometimes legumes such as lentils, beans, or peas were served in porridge or in a separate portion, which served as an important source of protein, replacing scarce meat. If the Legion was on a long campaign or at a remote post, then the diet could be even more meager, consisting only of dried fruits, for example figs, and cheese. Meat, like breakfast, was rare. It could be obtained in the event of a successful hunt, in the form of a ration of salted pork, or as a result of the distribution of prey after a battle. Drinks remained the same: posa, diluted vinegar, or diluted wine. Water from springs, if it was doubtful, was also diluted. Meals were often taken outdoors in a camp or in the field. The soldiers sat on the ground or on their shields, forming small groups. It was a time for a short break, an exchange of words, but not for relaxation. What happened at these small meals? Lunch was a moment when you could take a little break from the drill and physical exertion. It was a time for simple conversations, exchanging jokes, often rather rude but morale-boosting, or simply eating in silence with those who shared the hardships of the service. In these unassuming dinners, when the soldiers shared their last handful of beans or a piece of bread, not only mutual dependence, but also deep affection grew between them. Sometimes when one warrior deliberately set aside the best piece for his comrade, and when they sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing the same bowl, these moments became a symbol of an unbreakable bond. It wasn't just food, it was confirmation that they weren't alone in this harsh world. The meal didn't last long, and when it was over, the trumpet called for action again. The soldiers rose, determined to continue their duties. The second half of the day was waiting for them, no less intense and demanding. Are you ready for what comes next? After a short lunch break, the Roman legionnaires began their afternoon duties, which were as varied and important as their morning training sessions. The Roman army was not only a fighting machine, but also a giant construction crew and logistics center, and every soldier was a cog in this complex mechanism. The main task often became the construction and maintenance of the camp. Even if the camp was built the day before, it required constant maintenance, deepening the ditches, strengthening the ramparts, repairing the palisade, building temporary structures such as armories, stables, baths. Soldiers worked with pickaxes, shovels, axes, hauling logs, and stones. It was hard, grueling physical work that required coherence and discipline. Everyone knew their role and performed it without delay. In addition to construction, The legionnaires were engaged in the maintenance of weapons and equipment. Shields needed repairs, swords needed sharpening, and armor needed cleaning and polishing. Bows and arrows, ballistas, and catapults all required constant attention and repair. Armorers and artisans among the soldiers played a key role, but each legionary was responsible for their own equipment. Важной частью послеполуденных обязанностей было guard duty was an important part of afternoon duties. Posts were set up around the perimeter of the camp, on watchtowers at the gates. The guards were relieved every few hours, ensuring constant vigilance. This service required not only physical endurance, but also mental concentration, because the safety of the entire camp depended on it. But what else was going on in those hours? When they were free from their basic duties, the soldiers could attend to personal matters, fix their clothes, write a letter home, if possible, or just relax. However, even in these moments, it was rare for anyone to be left alone. Communication was a key element of army life. The soldiers discussed the news, shared stories, played dice, or simply sat together, enjoying the rare moments of peace. At such times when physical labor gave way to communication, those informal ties could be strengthened. When one person helped the other fix the belt or just sat silently next to each other, sharing their fatigue, there was a special connection. These moments of intimacy, far removed from the official duties of Oste, were important for survival in a harsh male team, and some of them developed into deep, long-lasting relationships that went beyond the usual friendship and became an unspoken but very strong union. Afternoon duties ended with the approach of dusk, when the coolness of the evening deepened over the camp. The soldiers were exhausted, but their work ensured the safety and functioning of the entire army machine. But the day isn't over yet. What's next for them? As the sun began to set and work on the camp was gradually winding down, perhaps the most long-awaited moment of the day for a Roman legionary arrived dinner. It wasn't just a meal, it was a moment of relative peace, where you could relax, share your day's experiences, and strengthen your bonds with your friends. The ration for dinner was usually similar to dinner, but sometimes a little more varied if the supplies allowed. The basis was the same pulse, cereal porridge, or bread. They could add stewed vegetables, bean chowders with onions and garlic, and cheese. If the legion was located in a region with good resources, then more desirable products could appear. Olives, dried fruits, figs, dates, or even salted fish. Meat, if available, was also served for dinner. It could be a small piece of salted pork, sometimes fresh meat, if there was a slaughter of cattle or a successful hunt. But that was the exception rather than the rule. Meat in the Roman soldier's diet was more of a rare delicacy than an everyday meal. Drinks remained the same. Posa, diluted vinegar, or diluted wine. The wine, although sour and watery, created a certain mood and helped to relax after a hard day. Dinner was usually served in groups, with soldiers gathered around a communal cauldron or sharing food brought from the communal kitchen. It was a time to talk about the past few days, exchange news from home, if letters arrived, discuss tactics, or just make jokes and laugh to help ease the tension. In these moments, when tired bodies found rest and conversations flowed freely, there was often a special intimacy. Sharing food, sharing stories about home, or just being quietly present when one warrior adjusted another's pillow or silently passed him a cup of pasca. All this created an atmosphere of deep, genuine camaraderie. In the stillness of the night by the dying fire, many found not only physical but also emotional solace in the arms of their own kind, whose bonds were often stronger than the formal bonds of marriage and gave strength to survive the difficulties of service. Dinner wasn't just a meal, it was an important social ritual that strengthened the legion's cohesion. Mutual support, a sense of community, and an understanding that each was dependent on the other were integral parts of the Roman military machine. But after dinner, the day wasn't over yet. What awaits them before going to bed? After supper, when darkness was already completely enveloping the camp, the last but equally important stage of the Roman legionaries' day came: evening verification and taking over the night guard. This was the moment when discipline and vigilance reached their peak because the night was fraught with more dangers than the day. Evening verification contubernium was conducted in each tent or barracks. The centurions or their deputies went around each soldier to make sure that he was present and ready. They checked not only the number, but also the condition of weapons and the availability of equipment. This ritual was intended not only to ensure order, but also to remind everyone of their role and responsibility. After verification, many went to the night watch. The Roman army's guard system was extremely strict. Soldiers were posted around the perimeter of the camp, on watchtowers, at the gates, and inside the camp to maintain order. Guard shifts took place every few hours, and each soldier had to be ready for his turn. The night watch was one of the most difficult trials. The cold, the darkness, the fatigue, all this made the service painful. The soldiers had to maintain maximum concentration, listen to every sound, inspect the territory in order to notice any movement of the enemy, wild animals or deserters in time. For sleeping on duty or negligence, the most severe punishment was imposed, up to death. How was the night for those who were not on guard? Despite being tired, many of the soldiers could not immediately fall asleep. Anxious thoughts, aching muscles, the noise of sleepy companions, all this interfered. Some of them were cleaning their gear, others were talking quietly, remembering their home, and exchanging opinions about upcoming hikes. During these hours, when the whole camp was still and the light of the campfires barely dispelled the gloom, the most profound and personal conversations took place. Shared anxieties and shared hopes could lead to unspoken intimacy, with one warrior leaning unabashedly on the other's shoulder, or with words of comfort spoken in low whispers that bound them closer than any vow. These were the moments when the boundaries between friendship and something more blurred, offering warmth and protection on a cold, dangerous night. The night watch and verification were the last line of vigilance before the legion fell into a brief slumber. They symbolized a constant readiness for danger, which could come at any moment. The day of the Roman soldier ended as it had begun, under conditions of constant tension and the demand for maximum impact. Are you ready to take a peek into their brief slumber? After a busy day of drill, hard work, and guard duty, the Roman legionary was finally getting precious hours to sleep. But even this holiday was far from modern comfort. The soldier's sleep was short, light, and always interrupted, because in the army there was always a threat and the need to be ready. Miejscem dla sna slужила a barrack or tent served as a place to sleep. In barracks, if they were made of stone, soldiers slept on simple wooden bunks or straw mattresses spread out on the floor. On hikes in a contubernia, a tent where 8 people lived, space was even more limited. Each shared a small plot with 7 other men. This meant a complete lack of personal space and the constant presence of other people. The sleep was shallow. Legionnaires were trained to wake up at the slightest noise, a trumpet blast or a centurion's shout. The constant threat of attack, whether from enemies, wild beasts, or deserters, kept them in a state of constant vigilance. Many slept in their clothes to be ready for battle at any moment. Despite the fatigue, it was difficult to fully relax. The noise of sleeping companions, snores, groans from aching muscles, creaking wooden structures, or the sound of wind on the canvas of the tent. All this interfered with deep sleep. In addition, there was a change of guards every few hours, which also disturbed the peace of the sleepers. But what happened in those short hours of sleep? In the cramped quarters of barracks or tents, where the bodies of men lay close together, physical intimacy was unavoidable. In the absence of women and constant stress, emotional and physical needs found expression. It is possible that some warriors found comfort and tenderness in each other's arms, when darkness and fatigue erased the conventions of the day. The simple warmth of another body on a cold night, or a companion sleeping next to you, whose presence gave you a sense of security, could be a source of deep affection that formed in these quiet, personal moments. These nocturnal connections may have been tacit and informal, but they played an important role in maintaining morale and psychological well-being in the harsh conditions of army life. The legionnaire's sleep was functional. It served only for a minimal recuperation before the new day. It was a short break, but not a complete relaxation. After all, every hour of sleep brought him closer to a new dawn and new challenges. Are you ready to finish our dive into the life of a Roman soldier? Discipline in the Roman army was absolute and rigorous. It was the steel backbone of the legion, which ensured its invincibility and coherence. The slightest violation of the rules, delay or cowardice was punished incredibly harshly, sometimes with a cruelty that would have seemed savage to us today. For a soldier, punishment wasn't just retribution. It was a constant reminder of the cost of a mistake and that his personal life mattered less than the legion's honor and efficiency. The most common punishments were physical ones. For minor offenses, the soldier could receive blows with a stick, fustigatio, from the centurion or his deputies. It was humiliating and painful, but it was considered part of the educational process. More serious violations, such as theft or failure to comply with an order, could result in a porche, verberatio, which was inflicted with belts or rods, leaving deep wounds and scars. For cowardice in battle or desertion, the punishment was the most terrible: decimation. It was a ritual where every 10th warrior from a guilty cohort or century was executed by his own comrades. It was a collective punishment designed to inspire terror and strengthen discipline through blood. Deserters could be crucified or beaten to death. In addition to physical punishments, there were also forms of humiliation. Soldiers could be demoted, stripped of their privileges, forced to do the dirtiest jobs, or sleep outside the camp. This was no less severe than physical pain, as it affected the honor and position of the warrior in the team. But what did this system of punishment say about relationships within the legion? On the one hand, it created an atmosphere of fear and submission. On the other hand, it strengthened cohesion among those who remained steadfast. The soldiers understood that their survival depended on the unquestioning execution of orders and on the reliability of each comrade. In these moments of trial, when one warrior witnessed the punishment of another, or when they had to perform a difficult task together as punishment, a special bond emerged. Mutual sympathy, support, and even a quiet revolt against cruelty with hysteria could bring people closer together. It is possible that after harsh punishments, in moments of vulnerability and despair, some soldiers sought solace and support in each other, and this may have contributed to the formation of deep but informal ties that helped them survive in conditions of constant pressure and fear. Discipline was an integral part of the Roman soldier's life, shaping his character and determining his fate. It was the cement that held the legions together, making them one of the most effective armies in history. But there was another invisible opponent. If you think that the main threat to the Roman soldier came from enemy swords, then you are mistaken. The most insidious and deadly enemy of the legions was disease. They killed many times more soldiers than in the bloodiest battles. For the Roman soldier, the fight against invisible germs was a constant and often lost battle. Life in the army was fraught with disastrous, unsanitary conditions. Overcrowding in camps and barracks, lack of adequate hygiene, polluted water, insects that carry diseases, all this created ideal conditions for the lightning spread of infections. The most common killers were dysentery and other intestinal infections caused by drinking contaminated water and food. Diarrhea, vomiting, and dehydration quickly led to death. Typhoid, carried by lice that thrived in conditions of poor hygiene. High fever, rash, delirium typhus mowed down entire cohorts. Malaria, spread by mosquitoes in swampy regions. Fever, chills, and weakness made soldiers unfit for service and often led to death. Smallpox and plague. Epidemics of these diseases occasionally broke out in the legions, turning camps into cemeteries. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C due to a monotonous diet. It led to bleeding gums, tooth loss, weakness, and depression. Injuries, even minor ones, were often fatal due to infections. In the absence of antibiotics and sterile instruments, any scratch could lead to sepsis, blood poisoning. Gangrene was common, and the only way to save a life was often to amputate a limb without anesthesia, resulting in shock or death from blood loss. Field hospitals, valetudinariums, were primitive, and medical care was minimal. The lack of qualified medical personnel and lack of understanding of basic hygiene made survival after a serious injury more of a miracle than a pattern. In these circumstances, when one warrior saw his comrade suffer and die from an illness or wound, there was a feeling of helplessness and deep grief. Caring for sick comrades, despite the danger of infection, was commonplace. These moments when one held the hand of a dying friend or shared the last sip of water with a sick person could be filled with unbearable pain, but also with the deepest tenderness, forming an indissoluble bond. At such moments when death was near, the old boundaries were blurred and only pure, tender humanity remained, which manifested itself in acts of compassion and intimacy that often went beyond the generally accepted norms. Illness and death were constant companions of the Roman soldier, reminding him of the fragility of life and that the most formidable enemy can be invisible. It was a bitter lesson that every legionnaire learned firsthand. The Roman soldier's daily routine was a merciless cycle. From dawn to dusk, his life was filled with physical exertion, training, construction work, and constant vigilance. Each hour was dedicated to serving the empire, honing combat skills and fighting for survival. It was a life of hardship, danger, and often loneliness. But in this harsh routine, amid the dust of the roads, the clang of armor, and the smell of sweat, the deepest bonds were forming. Brotherhood in arms wasn't just a pretty phrase, it was a vital necessity. Soldiers depended on each other in battle, in work, in everyday life. They shared their meager rations, shelter, dangers, and rare moments of rest. It was in these conditions, when men were cut off from their families and familiar social norms, that special, informal, but strong ties often emerged. Allusions to same-sex love in the Roman army are not a myth. Although there were no official marriages, historical sources and archaeological finds, including graffiti and literary evidence, indicate the existence of deep emotional and physical ties between soldiers. In the face of constant stress, the absence of women and close male company, such relationships could be the only source of comfort, support, and tenderness. It was a love that was forged in the crucible of war and everyday life, often hidden but real, in giving strength to survive in inhumane conditions. The day of the Roman soldier ended as it had begun, with the expectation of a new dawn and new challenges. His life was a constant struggle, and his rest was only a brief break before the next round of service. For many, this peace did not end with demobilization, but with eternal sleep on a foreign land, far from home, among the comrades with whom he shared everything. The life of a Roman legionnaire was a feat often overlooked and unappreciated, but it was the foundation of the great empire we know. His daily routine wasn't just a routine, it was a giant machine where every warrior, with all their weaknesses and strengths, was an indispensable part. It is in this everyday life, in everyday affairs and hidden attachments, that the true story of the Roman soldier lies. This is not only a story of power and conquest, but also about humanity, survival, and finding warmth in the harshest conditions.